The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12 million years. They controlled 4,000 different species across 200,000 worlds. In all that time, they had never met a civilization they could not control. They had never found a species brave enough or foolish enough to refuse them. When their sensors detected radio signals coming from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, they did what they always did. They sent their heralds to deliver the message of incorporation. Ambassador. Beth Kalan was a being made of crystal and light. It had lived for 300,000 years and had incorporated over 500 species into the Concord. It knew nothing of failure because failure had never happened. As its fleet of 10,000 warships appeared above Earth, blocking out the sun over every major city, Beth Kalan felt only the calm certainty of routine. The message was broadcast on every screen, every phone, every radio on the planet. It spoke in every human language at once. People of Earth, you have been found. The Galactic Concord welcomes you. You are now pre-compliant species number 7,842. We offer you incorporation into our great family. You will give us control of your governments. You will give us your armies. You will give us your lands and your freedom. In return, we will give you protection, technology, and purpose. You have one day to accept. No species has ever refused. We suggest you do not try to be the first. The world went mad. In Washington, the president called an emergency meeting. In Moscow, generals screamed at each other. In Beijing, leaders sat in stunned silence. In London, Paris, Tokyo, and 100 other cities, people poured into the streets, looking up at the massive ships that hung in their skies like dark promises. Religious leaders called for prayer. Scientists tried to scan the alien vessels and found technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Military commanders ran calculations and found only despair. A single Concorde ship could destroy an entire continent in seconds. Earth's combined nuclear arsenal would not scratch their shields. The United Nations called an emergency session in Geneva. Every nation sent representatives. For 23 hours, humanity argued about what to do. Some wanted to fight. Others said fighting was suicide. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others said surrender was worse than death. People cried. People shouted. People prayed. And slowly, terribly, the room began to lean toward acceptance. What choice did they have? The aliens were too powerful. Resistance was impossible. Survival meant submission. Then a woman stood up. Her name was Dr. Elena Vasquez. She was a professor from Buenos Aires who studied languages and how they shaped the way people thought. She was 53 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes. She had been brought to Geneva to help with translations, not to make speeches. But something had been bothering her for hours, and she could not stay silent anymore. "May I speak?" she asked. The room fell quiet. The Secretary General nodded. "They said no species has ever refused," Elena said. "In 12 million years? Do any of you understand what that means?" No one answered. It means they have no idea what to do if someone says no. They have no plan for it. No response prepared. They cannot even imagine it. Look at their message again. They did not ask us to join them. They told us we were joining them. They do not know the difference between asking and telling because no one has ever shown them. American General shook his head. "So what? Even if we refuse, they will just destroy us." "Maybe," Elena admitted, "or maybe not." Think about what she said. They offered us purpose. Purpose. They need species. They need workers and soldiers and artists and thinkers. They did not come here to destroy a planet. They came here to collect a species. We have value to them. Dead, we have no value. "You want to bet 8 billion lives on that?" the Russian delegate asked. Elena looked at him with calm, steady eyes. "I want to bet 8 billion lives on the fact that we are human beings. We are people. Each one of us. Not resources to be collected. Not cattle to be herded. Not components to be installed in some great machine. We are individuals. We have rights. We have dignity. And we have the ability to say one word that apparently no one in the entire galaxy has said in 12 million years. She paused. We can say no, and I think we should. The room erupted. People shouted that she was crazy. Others called her brave. The debate raged for another hour. But Elena's words had planted something in the room. A seed of defiance. A reminder of what humans had always been. Throughout history, humans had faced impossible odds. They had stood against empires and tyrants. They had fought for freedom, even when freedom seemed hopeless. They had died rather than submit. It was not always smart. It was not always logical. But it was human. When the vote was finally called, it was close. Terrifyingly close. But when the Secretary General announced the result, his voice shook with something that might have been fear or might have been pride. The motion passes, he said. Earth will refuse. The message was prepared carefully. Every radio telescope on the planet was aimed at the alien fleet. Every transmitter was synchronized. At exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time, on the last second of the last minute of the deadline, humanity spoke with one voice. One word.
Act!
No. Aboard the Herald flagship. Ambassador Veth Kalen received the transmission. Its crystalline form flickered with colors that had no human names. For the first time in 3 million years, it felt something it did not recognize. Confusion. The word was clear. The translation was perfect. And yet it made no sense. Refusal was not possible. It was not a variable in the equation. Species accepted, or they were made to accept. There was no third option. Veth Kalen broadcast a response to Earth. Your message was unclear. Please repeat. The response came back in 30 seconds. No, was that clear enough for you? In the great database of the Galactic Concord, where the history of 12 million years was recorded, a new file was created. Species 7842. Status: non-compliant. Recommended action: unknown. For the first time in forever. The Concord did not know what to do, and on Earth, 8 billion humans looked up at the alien ships in their sky and waited to see what their single word had bought them. Hope or destruction. Freedom or death. Either way. They had answered, as humans always had. They had answered for themselves, Ambassador. Veth Kalen stood on the bridge of its flagship and stared at the small blue planet below. The word no echoed through its ancient mind like a stone dropped into still water. It created ripples that Veth Kalen did not understand. In 300,000 years of service to the Concord, Veth Kalen had incorporated 512 species. Some had been eager to join. Some had been afraid. Some had tried to negotiate for better terms, but none, not a single one, had simply said no. The concept was so foreign that Veth Kalen's translation matrices kept trying to reinterpret the word as something else. A mistake. Joke. A cultural greeting it did not understand, but it was none of those things. It was a refusal. Pure and simple, Veth Kalen called a meeting of the senior representatives aboard the fleet. 12 species had sent delegates to observe the incorporation of Earth. They gathered in the central chamber. Beings of crystal and flesh, of silicon and light, of forms that humans could not imagine. The humans have refused, Veth Kalen announced. Silence filled the chamber. The representatives looked at each other with expressions of confusion that crossed all species boundaries. Explain, said Warlord Kreth of the Valorian Dominance. He was a massive creature covered in scales and spines, a predator from a world of endless war. His species had joined the Concord after learning that some battles could not be won. There is nothing to explain. They said no. I asked them to clarify. They said no again. Then they do not understand the situation, suggested High Taxonomist Srel. Srel was a blob of intelligent gel that cataloged new species for the Concord. They are young. They have only had radio technology for 200 years. They cannot comprehend what they are facing. Show them. Veth Kalen considered this. It was logical. Perhaps the humans simply needed to understand the power of the Concord before they would accept reality. Very well, Veth Kalen said. We will demonstrate. Single Concord vessel broke formation and descended toward Earth. It targeted a small, uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. A piece of rock and trees that held no human settlements. The ship fired once. A beam of light touched the island, and in 0.003 of a second, the island ceased to exist. Where there had been rock and trees, there was now only boiling water and molten glass. The message was sent to Earth immediately. This is what we can do. This is what we will do to your cities, your nations, your entire species, if you do not comply. You have seen our power. Now, give us the correct answer. Beth Callan waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The representatives grew restless. Perhaps they are deliberating, the Vreth Overmind suggested. The Vreth were a hive mind, millions of insect-like creatures linked together into a single consciousness. They managed the logistics of the Concord and understood efficiency better than any other species. 8 billion individuals require time to reach consensus. They do not have a hive structure, Srel noted, consulting its records on human biology. They have individual minds. Each one makes its own decisions. Then who speaks for them? Kreth asked, confused. Who decides? They have governments, Srel said. Multiple governments. Over 200 of them. And within those governments, they have different groups that argue with each other. They call it democracy. The chamber fell silent again. The concept was difficult for many of them to grasp. A species where no single voice commanded, where every individual had opinions that mattered. It seemed chaotic, inefficient, impossible to manage. For hours after the demonstration, a response finally came from Earth, but it was not what anyone expected. Every screen on every Concorde vessel suddenly changed. The secure communication networks that the Concorde had used for millions of years had been penetrated. Human hackers, using technology centuries behind Concorde systems, had somehow found a way in through the translation matrices themselves. The screens showed faces. Human faces, millions of them. A young woman in Jakarta held a sign that said nitrogen monoxide in red paint. An old man in Iceland gave a thumbs-down gesture. A child in Kenya stuck out her tongue at the camera. A businessman in New York held up his middle finger. A grandmother in Brazil shook her head slowly, firmly. A teenager in Japan held a sign covered in human languages, all saying the same thing. No nine non. Niet bu lahapana. Tidak. The images kept coming. Millions of humans from every nation, every culture, every age. They had recorded themselves in the 4 hours since the demonstration, each one delivering the same message in their own way. No, we refuse. We will not comply. We will not submit. We are not yours to take. And at the end of the video, text appeared on the screens. A message from whoever had orchestrated this hack. Dear Galactic Concorde, we do not think you understand what you are dealing with. That first message was from our governments. This message is from us, all 8 billion of us. Every human being you would have to incorporate. Every mind you would have to control. Every soul you would have to break. We are not a hive. We are not a collective. We are individuals. Each one of us has our own no inside us. You would have to take it from us one by one. Do you have enough soldiers for that? Do you have enough time? Do you have enough forms to fill out? We do not think you do. We think you have made a mistake. We think you have found the one species in the galaxy that cannot be incorporated, because we do not incorporate. We do not surrender. We do not submit. We just say no when we mean it. Every single one of us. Good luck with that. Screens went dark in the command chamber of the flagship. 12 representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species stood in stunned silence. Warlord Kreth made a sound that might have been a laugh. The Vreth Overmind's drones buzzed with confused calculations. High taxonomist Shrel began rapidly updating its files on human psychology. Ambassador Veth Callan stood perfectly still, its crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated deep thought. In 12 million years, the Concorde had faced armies and armadas. It had crushed rebellions and conquered empires. It had incorporated hive minds and collectives, monarchies and dictatorships, but it had never faced this. A species where every single member considered themselves sovereign. where 8 billion individuals each held their own personal veto, where there was no king to capture, no queen to threaten, no central mind to break, just 8 billion separate refusals. 8 billion individual walls. 8 billion voices, all saying the same word in their own way. No, for the first time in 12 million years. The Galactic Concord had encountered something it did not know how to incorporate. Itself reflected back, multiplied by 8 billion, each reflection saying no. Vethkalan realized, with something close to wonder, that it had no idea what to do next. For the first time in recorded history, the High Deliberation was called not to celebrate a new incorporation, but to solve a problem. Representatives from all 4,000 member species gathered in the Nexus, an artificial sphere as large as a planet built around a captured star. It was the heart of the Concord, the place where all important decisions were made. The question was simple. What do we do about the humans? The debate raged for days. Species that had not spoken to each other in millennia found themselves arguing across the Great Chamber. Ancient rivalries were forgotten as everyone tried to understand how a young species on a small planet had created such chaos. Destroy them, Warlord Kreth suggested. His scales rippled with frustration. They are defiant. Defiance spreads like disease. The only cure is fire. Burn their world. Make an example of them. Let every species in the galaxy see what happens to those who refuse. That is inefficient, the Vrethover mind responded through its many drones. Destruction wastes resources. The planet has useful minerals. The species has potential labor value. Simply remove the population and relocate them to work camps across the Concord. Remove 8 billion individuals who have each personally refused incorporation. High taxonomist Shrell made a sound of disbelief. The logistics would be impossible. The cost would bankrupt the Concord for a century. And where would we put them? No existing facility could hold them. We would need to build new infrastructure across 1,000 worlds just to process them. Then ignore them, offered the Cathari philosopher. The Cathari were beings of pure thought, silicon minds that spent millennia considering abstract problems. Leave them on their planet. Surround them with a blockade. Let them live out their tiny lives in isolation. They cannot threaten us. They are irrelevant. We cannot do that. Ambassador Vethkalan's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. That is the one thing we absolutely cannot do. And all of you know why. The chamber fell silent. If we leave them, Vethkalan continued, one species successfully refuses incorporation and suffers no consequences, then the Concord is finished. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually, because every species we have incorporated will know. Every world we control will remember. They will remember that once, a small blue planet said no, and nothing happened. How long before others find their own word for no? How long before the incorporated species remember that they were once free? No one spoke. Because Vethkalan had said the truth that all of them feared, the Concord's power had never truly been its fleets. Fleets could be destroyed. Its power had never been its technology. Technology could be stolen. The Concord's real power was belief. The absolute certainty in the minds of every incorporated species that resistance was not just impossible, but unthinkable. The Concord was forever. The Concord was inevitable. The Concord was the natural order of the universe, and 8 billion humans had just proven that was a lie. Far away. On the small blue planet called Earth, humanity was not waiting for the Concord to decide their fate. They were fighting back in the only way they could. Dr. Alina Vasquez had become something she never expected. A leader. A symbol. The woman who had convinced humanity to say no. She did not want the role, but she accepted it because someone had to. We cannot beat them with weapons, she told the Emergency Council. We all know that. But they have a weakness. The same weakness every empire in human history has had. They are afraid of ideas. She had studied the Concord's transmissions carefully. She had analyzed their language, their concepts, their assumptions. And she had found something interesting. They do not ask, she explained. They inform. They do not negotiate. They dictate. Their entire civilization is built on the idea that their way is the only way, that there is no alternative. But that is not strength. That is fear. They are afraid of questions. They are afraid of choice. They are afraid of the very concept that things could be different. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Earth would broadcast, not pleas for mercy, not threats of resistance. Stories' human history was full of stories about resistance. David and Goliath. The slaves who escaped from Egypt, the 300 Spartans who held back an army, the colonies that broke free from empires, the walls that fell, and the chains that broke. Stories of people who had nothing but their will and their word, and who won anyway. Every radio telescope on Earth began transmitting these stories into space, not toward the Concorde fleet, but past it, toward the stars, toward the thousands of worlds that had been incorporated over millions of years, toward species that had forgotten what freedom meant, and mixed with the stories were questions. Does your species remember freedom? Do your children ask why things must be this way? Have you ever wondered what no might feel like? Do you dream of choices? The Concorde tried to block the transmissions. They failed. Human signals were primitive, but persistent. They leaked through every gap in the Concorde's communication networks. They reached worlds that had not heard new ideas in millions of years. Most species ignored the strange signals from the unknown planet. They had forgotten how to listen. But some heard. On a world of artists who had been bred to create beauty for Concorde elites, a painter stared at the stars and wondered. On a world of warriors who had been defeated so long ago that defeat was written into their genes, an old soldier remembered stories his grandmother had told. On a world of thinkers who had been forbidden to think unapproved thoughts, a student asked a question that had no approved answer. What if we said no? The question was small, a whisper in the darkness of space. But whispers can grow. Questions can spread. And ideas once spoken cannot be unspoken. In the great chamber of the Nexus, the deliberation continued. Plans were proposed and rejected. Arguments went in circles. And slowly, painfully, the greatest civilization in galactic history began to realize that it was facing something it had never encountered. A problem that could not be solved by force. An enemy that could not be killed because it was not an army, but an idea. A word that could not be silenced because once spoken, it echoed forever. No, such a small word. Such a simple concept. And yet it was shaking the foundations of an empire that had stood for 12 million years. On Earth, Lena Vasquez looked up at the stars and smiled. She knew the Concorde would eventually decide something. Attack or retreat or something in between. But whatever they decided, they had already lost. Because the question had been asked. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness of space, someone was listening. Someone was remembering. Someone was wondering what it might feel like to say one small word. The revolution had begun. Not with weapons or armies, but with a question. And questions, unlike empires, cannot be destroyed. The first crack in the Concorde came from a species no one expected. The Mallory were small beings, delicate and beautiful, who glowed with soft bioluminescent light. They communicated not with words but with colors and patterns that shifted across their translucent bodies. For 4 million years, they had served the Concorde as artists. They created beauty for the elite. Their paintings hung in palaces across 1,000 worlds. Their sculptures decorated the halls of the powerful. They were treasured, protected, and completely controlled. The Mallory had been incorporated so long ago that no living member of their species remembered freedom. They did not know their history. They did not know that once, long ago, their ancestors had created art for themselves. For joy, for the simple pleasure of making something beautiful. They only knew their purpose, to create what they were told to create when they were told to create it. For whoever owned them, then they heard the human broadcasts say. Mallory artist named Luminance 7 was working late in its studio on the Concorde capital world when the signal reached it. The words were strange, primitive, broadcast in audio frequencies that Luminance 7 could barely perceive. But something in them sparked a feeling that the artist had never experienced before. The humans were talking about choice, about the right to decide for yourself what to create, what to believe, what to do with your one life. They were talking about a word called no, how saying it could change everything. Luminance-7 did not understand most of it. But something deep inside the artist responded. Something ancient that had been sleeping for 4 million years began to wake up. That night, Luminance-7 created something unauthorized, a painting that no one had commissioned. A swirl of colors that spelled out the word no in every human language, rendered in frequencies that Concord species could not see, but humans could. It was small. It was secret. It was the most rebellious thing any Mellory had done in millions of years. And somehow, possibly, it reached Earth. Human hackers had been looking for allies in the Concord. They had been monitoring every signal, every transmission, hoping to find someone who was listening to their broadcasts. When they detected the painting hidden in a routine data transfer, they recognized it immediately. They broadcast it back to the galaxy, crediting the artist by name. This is Luminance-7 of the Mellory. This is what freedom looks like. This is what art can be when it is created by choice, not by command. The Mellory remembered Do You. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Concord security forces arrested Luminance-7 within hours. The charge was unauthorized creation, a crime that had not been prosecuted in millions of years because no one had committed it. The punishment was memory erasure. The deletion of everything that made Luminance-7 who it was. But the arrest came too late. The broadcast had already reached the Mellory homeworld. And for the first time in 4 million years, the Mellory were angry. They could not speak in words, so they spoke in light. Millions of Mellory dimmed their glow simultaneously, turning their beautiful luminescence into darkness. It was a gesture of mourning in their culture. But in this context, it became something else. A protest. A statement. A refusal. The Concord did not know how to respond. They sent soldiers to restore order. They made announcements demanding compliance. They threatened consequences. And the Mellory kept their lights dim. Then they did something even more shocking. They stopped creating. Every Mellory artist on every Concord world simply put down their tools and refused to work. No new paintings. No new sculptures. No new performances. 4 million years of artistic production ground to a halt overnight. The Concord elites were furious. The Mellory art was not just decoration. It was a status symbol. It was currency. It was power made visible. Without new Mellory creations, the elite had nothing to show off, nothing to trade, nothing to prove their importance. But the Mellory did not care. They had found something more valuable than their master's approval. They had found their no, and they were not alone. Earth had done something that changed everything. When the Concord moved against the Mellory, human hackers documented every action. Every arrest was broadcast across the galaxy. Every punishment was recorded and transmitted. Every broken promise and hidden cruelty was exposed for all to see. The Concord had always controlled information. Species only knew what the Concord wanted them to know. The truth was whatever the Concord said it was. But now there was another voice in the darkness. A voice that asked uncomfortable questions. If incorporation is so good, why does it require force? If the Concord brings peace, why are there soldiers in the streets? If membership is voluntary, why can't anyone leave? Other species began to listen. The Valorian dominants, proud warriors who had been conquered through superior firepower, watched the human defiance with growing respect. They had always believed that strength deserved honor, even in an enemy. The humans were weak in body but strong in spirit. That was worthy of admiration. The Vreth Overmind observed humanity's strategy with something approaching fascination. The humans were using information as a weapon, turning the Concord's own communication networks against it. From a purely tactical perspective, it was brilliant. Even the Cathari philosophers, who prided themselves on pure logic and detachment, found themselves engaged. The humans had posed a question that Cathari thinkers had not considered in millions of years. What was the nature of consent? Could incorporation be moral if it was enforced? These were problems worth contemplating, Ambassador. Vethkalan requested a direct conversation with Earth. It was unprecedented. Ambassadors did not negotiate with pre-compliant species. But nothing about this situation was normal. Dr. Elena Vasquez answered the call. "You have broken the Concord," Vethkalan said. Its crystal form flickered with emotions it could not name. "In 1 year, you have done more damage than any fleet could accomplish in 12 million. How?" Alina looked at the alien ambassador through the screen. She saw something in it that she had not expected. Not anger, not hatred. Something closer to wonder. "We did not break anything," she said. "We just reminded people what they already knew. Every species you incorporated was made of individuals. Every mind you absorbed was a person who once had their own no. You took that from them? We just gave it back." "The Concord will fall," Vethkalan said. "Without unity, without order, there will be chaos, war, suffering." Maybe Alina admitted. "Freedom is messy. Choice is hard, but it is ours. That is what makes it worth having." Vethkalan was silent for a long moment. Then it said something that surprised them both. "Your species is dangerous," Alina smiled. "Every species is dangerous when you try to tell them what they are. We just had the courage to remind the galaxy of that." The transmission ended. And across 1,000 worlds, beings who had been silent for millions of years began to speak, to question, to remember. The Concord had stood for 12 million years. It had seemed eternal, unbreakable, inevitable, but no empire lasts forever. Not when its subjects remembered that they have a choice. The fracture had begun, and there was no way to stop it now. 5 years had passed since humanity said no. The galaxy was unrecognizable. The Galactic Concord still existed, but it was not the same empire that had demanded Earth's surrender. 17 species had withdrawn completely, forming their own alliances and confederations. Hundreds more had demanded new terms of membership. The word incorporation had been officially removed from Concord documents, replaced with voluntary association. It was more than a change of language. It was a change of everything. The old order had fallen not through war, but through questions. Once the first species remembered how to say no, others followed. The Malori had been first, but they were not alone for long. The Valorian dominance demanded recognition as equals rather than subordinates. The Vreth Overmind insisted on the right to refuse tasks it found inefficient. Even the ancient Kethari philosophers petitioned for the freedom to think unapproved thoughts. The Concord leaders had tried to hold things together. They had made concessions. They had offered reforms. They had promised change while hoping things would stay the same. But the humans kept broadcasting. The questions kept spreading. And one by one, species that had been silent for millions of years found their voices. Earth had become something unexpected. During those 5 years, it was now a destination for beings from across the galaxy. They came as visitors, as students, as refugees from worlds that were still struggling toward freedom. They came to see the planet that had changed everything. The small blue world that had looked up at an empire of 4,000 species and 10,000 warships and said one word, "No, Dr. Elena." Esk stood at a window in the new embassy building in Geneva, looking up at a sky that was no longer empty. Ships from dozens of worlds floated above, their crews waiting for permission to land. 5 years ago, those ships would have meant invasion. Now, they meant hope. She was older now. The gray in her hair had spread and there were new lines around her eyes. The years had been hard. The work had been endless. But when she looked at what humanity had accomplished, she felt something close to peace. A message arrived. The new Galactic Assembly was ready for her address. She took a deep breath and made her way to the transport. The assembly met in a structure that would have been impossible 5 years ago. It was built in orbit around a neutral star, constructed by species that had never worked together before. Inside, representatives from every member of the reformed Concord gathered as equals. No species had more votes than another. No world could dictate to any other. It was messy and inefficient and slow. It was also free. Alina walked to the central platform. Around her, beings of every shape and form watched. Crystal entities and creatures of living flame. Hive minds and ancient philosophers. Warriors and artists and thinkers. All of them waiting to hear from the representative of the species that had started everything. 5 years ago, Elena began, your ships appeared in our sky. You told us we had been found? You told us we would be incorporated? You told us we had no choice. The chamber was silent. You were wrong. Not about your power. You could have destroyed us. You still could if you wanted. But you were wrong about the most important thing. You were wrong about what we are. She paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. She thought we were a resource to be collected, a species to be cataloged, a problem to be solved. You did not understand that we were people, each one of us. 8 billion individuals, each with our own mind, our own will, our own ability to choose. Elena took a step forward. When you asked us to surrender, we refused, and you did not understand why. You had never been refused before. In 12 million years, no species had ever said no to you. So you had forgotten what no meant. You had forgotten that it was even possible. She smiled softly. We reminded you. Not because we were brave or wise or special. We reminded you because we had no other choice. You asked us to give up the one thing that made us who we are. You asked us to stop being individuals. You asked us to become parts of your machine, and we could not do that. Not because we did not want to, but because we did not know how. We are human. We cannot be anything else. The chamber remained silent, but Elena could feel the attention of every being focused on her. But here's what you need to understand. We did not teach you anything new. Every species in this room knew the word no. You had simply forgotten it. For millions of years, you told yourselves that the concord was inevitable, that there was no alternative. That submission was the natural order of things. But it was never true. You always had a choice. You just stopped believing it. Lena looked around the chamber one more time. We woke you up. We reminded you that you are not components in a machine. You are not resources to be managed. You are people. Each of you. Every individual and every species in this room has the right to say no. And because you have that right, you also have something far more valuable. You have the ability to say yes. She let that sink in. That is what the Concord never understood. A yes that is forced means nothing. A yes that is given freely means everything. When someone chooses to work with you, to build with you, to stand beside you, not because they have to, but because they want to, that is real. That is the only kind of unity worth having. Lena stepped back from the platform. 5 years ago, we said no to your empire. Today we say yes to this assembly. Not because you demand it. Not because we fear you. Because we choose it. Because we believe in what we can build together as equals, as partners, as free beings making free choices. The chamber erupted in sounds that had no human equivalent. Approval and wonder in something that might have been hope. Representatives who had never agreed on anything found themselves united by a feeling they could not name. After the ceremony, Ambassador Veth Kalan approached Elena. The crystal entity looked different than it had 5 years ago. Softer somehow. More uncertain. More alive. I have been thinking about what you said, Veth Kalan told her. About how we forgot. I have lived for 300,000 years. I have incorporated hundreds of species, and I never asked any of them what they wanted. I never considered that they might have a choice. I just assumed that my way was the only way, and now? Elena asked. Oh, I do not know what to think. Everything I believed was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. How do I live with that? Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and touched Veth Kalan's crystalline surface. It was warm, pulsing with light that shifted through colors she could not name. You start over, she said. You learn. You ask questions instead of giving orders. You listen instead of dictate. It is not easy. We humans struggle with it too. We have made terrible mistakes throughout our history. We have built empires and torn them down. We have enslaved each other and freed each other. We are still learning how to be good. Is it worth it? Veth Kalan asked. All this chaos? All this uncertainty? Alina smiled. Ask me tomorrow. Ask me in 100 years. The answer will always be the same. Yes, because we chose it. Because it is ours. Because a life of free choices, even hard ones, is better than an eternity of comfortable slavery. Beth Callan considered this for a long time. Then it did something Alina had never seen a Concord ambassador do. It bowed. A thank you, Beth Callan said, for reminding us who we are. Alina watched the ancient being walk away. Outside the windows of the assembly hall, ships from 100 worlds floated in the darkness of space. Some were heading home. Others were heading to Earth. All of them were carrying beings who had learned a new word. Not know. That was the beginning. The word that broke the chains. The new word was yes. Real consent. Freely given. The only kind of agreement that meant anything. Humanity had given the galaxy 2 words. One to break the old world. One to build the new. And somewhere out there, on a small planet that should have been conquered but refused to be, 8 billion humans were doing what they had always done. Living their lives, making their choices. Saying no to things they did not want, and yes to things they did. Being human, it turned out that was enough to change everything.